Okay, so looking at this, we're being asked to figure out which expression is equivalent or equal to this. What I can see is that each of these has been rewritten as a multiplication. When I look at all my answer choices, it looks like they kept everything on the same side. So there was no commuting being done here. So it looks like all they did was rewrite this as a multiplication. So we know when we rewrite as a multiplication, we are multiplying by the reciprocal, so I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal, which would be flipped over 2 over 1, and then this was negative, so it's negative 2 over 1, which would be 3 times negative 2. That's answer choice C. Which expression is equivalent to the equation 3 times negative 1/2? So here it looks like we've got multiplications, so there's not really a need to change that. So any of these that don't have the same terms are definitely going to be wrong. And here it looks like this would be equivalent because it is the same. And this would also be equivalent because it uses the commutative property. Alright, so let's go ahead and look on over at our aim for today. Our aim for today, Kipsters will be able to efficiently multiply, divide strings of rational numbers. Okay. Alright, so we're going to look at evaluating the expression below. Go ahead and do this on your own, and then we'll talk about maybe some of the different strategies that some of you used in the classroom. Alright, so I see two general strategies here when students go through this problem. The first is to the first general strategy is to chunk. So 6 times, this should be a positive 2, is a negative 12, times a negative 2 times negative 5, which would be positive 10, times negative 3. Negative 12 times positive 10 is going to give me negative 120, times negative 3, which gives me negative 360. Actually, as I look back, we should have this as a positive 360 because we have a negative times a negative at the end. It should be a positive 360. So other strategies I often see used are people using the commutative or associative property. Negative 6 times 2 times negative 2 times negative 5 times negative 3. Sometimes a lot of people will like to get all of their, kind of pair up all of their negatives, so they might go ahead and commute 2 times negative 6 times negative 2 times negative 5 times negative 3. So they've used the commutative property and then use the associative property to go ahead and pair up all of their negatives. That way they know that it's going to be a positive. So 2 times 12 times 15. Maybe we'll do this one first. 24 times 15. And that gives us 360. So there's lots of different ways and lots of different options that you have here. I really like to pair up my negatives like we did here on the right, um, in order to kind of help me keep track of negatives and positives early. Because once you've kind of figured out what those pairings are, if you have a negative left over, then you know you're going to end up with a negative answer. If you don't have any negatives left over after all those pairings, then you know you're going to end up with a positive answer. So we see a couple types of strategies here. One is pairing and chunking. We see some commutative property. We see some associative property. And in general, we don't really see a whole lot other than that in terms of extra different strategies. All right, so identify the benefits for you of maybe doing these two different ways. So think about, just kind of split your space down the middle just like we did up there. And what are the benefits of maybe doing it the way that we did on the left and doing it on the right? Go ahead and fill that out with your responses. What are the benefits you think to doing it the way that we did on the left and on the right? So go ahead and pause and answer that for yourself. So you could have said a lot of different things here. I think one of the benefits to what happens here on the left is you pair these together, you get a multiplication of 10, which is a nice easy number to multiply with. You also see the benefits of this. There's less rearranging, so there's less opportunities for mistakes. So compatible numbers is a benefit of what we did over here on the left hand side. Less rearranging. Could mean less mistakes. Over here, over on the right hand side, this was nice because you took care of all of the sign information early. Alright. What is the sign of the product and how is the sign determined? So here we saw that it was positive. And really we figured out the sign by looking at every pair, every multiplication, applying the sign rule. So applying sign rule. To each multiplication along the way. Alright. So looking over here, find an efficient strategy to evaluate and complete the expression below. So go ahead and do this problem quickly on your own, and we'll talk about what works best for individuals here. Okay, so a lot of you may have done this very different ways. So go ahead and answer the question, what terms did you combine first and why? So answer that in the space below. While you're doing that, I'll go ahead and complete the problem above. Alright, so looking at this, what terms did I combine first? Well, I went ahead and paired up all my positive numbers and all my negative numbers, so basically put all my negative numbers together. I also kind of put them in such a way that I would keep this multiplication of 10 over here as kind of times 20, which is pretty easy for me. And when I saw that, I had one leftover negative number that didn't pair up, which means I know that my answer is going to be negative. From there, I'm going to go ahead and do this one first. That's going to give me negative 6 times 20, which is equal to negative 120. So what terms did I combine first? Hopefully you had your own different answers, but for me, I would say I combined negatives and positives in pairs, keeping the 1 and the negative 1 and the negative 3 together. Alright, find an efficient strategy to evaluate the expression below. So again, kind of look at this one and jump through the steps on your own. And try and focus on when you're doing this, what would be the most efficient way to do this? So when I look at this one, I feel like I have a couple of choices here. One, for me, I know that if I'm looking at multiplying with 1/2, that I'd really like to put that with something that's compatible. In other words, a number where it's maybe going to wipe out the fraction portion here. So if I have negative 1/2, I want to multiply that by an even number. I'm really lucky here that I have an even number that's also negative. That way I can think through this like I have my other problems by pairing up my negatives and my positives. So I'm going to go ahead and rearrange this. So I have 4 times 13 times 9 times negative 8 times negative 1/2. And I'm doing that because this is going to give me a positive, but it's also going to give me the negative 8 over 2, negative 2, which equals positive 4. So that's going to give me a whole number. So I'm going to be dealing with only whole numbers after this. 4 times 13 times 9 times 4. And here, again, I can chunk out. I'm not really seeing a way that's going to make this kind of any easier other than maybe dealing with the chunks maybe like this kind of makes the most sense. This is going to give me 36. That's a quick fact I know. This one's going to give me 1326. 3952. And then I've definitely got some work to do here. 52 times 36. It's going to give me 1,872. Alright, so what terms did we combine first and why? I combined negative 8 and negative 1/2. For really two reasons. One, mostly this fraction and whole number is compatible with the whole number. Because it gave me a whole number. 2, paired my negatives. Now that won't always be the case that we can do both of these, because sometimes, I mean, if I had my 1/2 be a positive, I probably would have wanted to pair it up with the 4, okay? That way, I would have had it that way. So it's really just difficult. Sometimes you're going to have to end up unpairing your negatives just so you can get whole numbers to work with. Alright, so looking at all this, kind of thinking about what I've done and the way I think about pairing up my negatives, is there a quick way that you think you can determine whether or not the answer is going to be positive or negative without doing any extra work? Think to yourself, what happens when I'm able to pair everything up, and what happens when I'm not able to pair everything up? So hopefully you're thinking, looking through kind of a couple of these examples. Looking at this example, I was able to pair up all of my negatives. In other words, I had an even number of negatives. And I got a positive answer because all of them paired up to become positive. If I look at another example, like this one over here, I was able to pair up one of my negatives, but then I had a negative left over because I had an odd number of negatives. And when I had that happen, that negative came all the way through. So even negatives pair up to become positive. Odd negatives leave one out. So it stays negative. And that's a quick and easy way to go ahead and look through this work and be able to complete it, complete your sign without having to work too incredibly hard. Alright, flip on over to your partner work time and jump through those problems. Go ahead and pause the video until you have that work done. So here we're just asking you to simplify each expression. Again, looking through this, do it in ways that is most efficient. Sometimes that means pairing up your negatives, but at this point you probably don't even really need to pair up your negatives because you now know kind of a better rule about determining the sign. You can kind of just throw the sign down there at the end. So for example, when I look at this first problem, I see that there is 1, 2 negatives, which means there's an even number of negatives. I know when I get to my answer down here at the bottom that my answer is going to be a positive number. So even if I lose track of my negatives somewhere in the middle or have to pair things differently than I would really want to, I'm still going to end up okay. I also want to call your attention to this first problem, just thinking about it. This says that we need to rewrite the expression as a multiplication and then evaluate. So when we think about all of our rules, commutative property, associative property, and if we think about wanting to leave our answer as a fraction, then we definitely want to go ahead and leave a lot of this as much as possible as a fraction. So when I look at this, I have divided by 23. I want to rewrite that as the multiplication 1 times 1 over 23 times negative 8 times 3 Then I need to rewrite this one times, flip that, -2. Alright, so we've rewritten this as a multiplication. Now we can think about our compatible numbers and rearranging. You know, for me, I'm going to be able to see this one as 1 times 1 over 23 times 3 times -8 times -2. For me, that brings together my two values here. This is a really easy multiplication, so I'll go ahead and get that one out of the way. This is 1 over 23 times 3 times 16. So I don't, with this denominator of 23, that's probably the last thing that I want to deal with. That's not really compatible with anything. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply together my 16 times my 3. That gives me 48. Times 1 over 23. And I'm just going to leave this as a fraction. Top times top, bottom times bottom. It's going to give me 48 over 23. Okay, so go ahead and once again make sure that you've done all these problems looking at your compatible numbers first to figure out what you can to make things a little bit easier. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this one as a multiplication. 4.2 times -1/3 multiplied by the reciprocal, that's 1 over 16 times -10. So a couple things here. One thing I definitely notice here is that if I multiply a decimal times 10, that's going to get rid of my decimal. So even though those are not a positive negative pair, I'm going to go ahead and do that and rearrange those together, the 4.2 times the -10, mainly because I know that's going to help me out with everything else. So that leaves me with times -1/3 times 1 over 16. I'm just going to leave that for now. Just thinking through this, I also see that I have an even number of negatives, so I know when I get to my answer down here, it's going to be positive. So multiplying these two together, this multiplication is really easy. Just moves the decimal as -42 times -1 over 3 times 1 over 16. This is a nice one for me to go ahead and do because I know that one's going to come out even, because this is 7 times 6, and 6 has a factor of 3. So this ends up being the same thing as 7 times 2. This is a positive 14 times 1 over 16, which is 14 over 16, which simplifies to 7 over 8. And again, positive. Alright, hopefully you've worked through this one as well. This one has one division. I'm going to rewrite this as a multiplication, times -2 times -13 times -8 times 3. Again, thinking about my negatives early on. I'm all paired up here. So my answer definitely down here is going to be positive. There's no like compatible fractions to really think about. And I don't necessarily see anything that's really going to help me out here. So I'm going to go with 22. This is 13 times 8. Which is 4. Carry the 2. 104. Then I'm going to go ahead and multiply these two together. That's going to give me, because I can kind of do that one in my head quickly. That's 312. So I have 22 times 312. and I get 68/64. Alright, last one. Once again, I'm looking at this, and this one's a little bit funky because we end up with a decimal on the bottom of a fraction when we rewrite this as a multiplication. So that just means that in the end, we're going to have to do something with that to kind of fix it up. And for this one, my intuition says that I want to go ahead and multiply my negative times my negative, but I actually know that this negative 1/3 is compatible with 42, and that it's going to give me a whole number. So I'm actually going to rearrange it to put those two together. And again, I'm not really worried about that so much anymore because I see that there's an even number here, so I know that my answer is going to be positive. Alright, so these come together here. This is going to give me a negative 14. I'm going to go ahead and throw my other whole number next to it because I don't really see any benefit with the 1 over 1.6 over here. Negative 20 times 1 over 1.6. Multiplying this all together, this is going to give me 280 times 1 over 1.6. And so that's going to give me 280 divided by 1.6. And because there is a decimal here in our denominator, that's not an appropriate way to leave an answer. I'm actually going to go ahead and do the division here. 280 divided by 16, 1.6. Decimal moves one time, decimal moves one time. This goes in 2 times. Sorry, just 1 time. 16, remainder 12. Bring down the 0. This is going to go in, I think, 7 times. Check that out. 16 times 7 is 2. Carry the 4. Yep, 112. Gives me a remainder 8, and this goes in exactly 5 times. So it looks like I'm going to get an answer here of 175. Alright, flip on over to your alone time and get your work done on your alone time, and then move on to your con.